Welcome everybody to another episode of Chocolate Travels. Today I'm talking to Nick from One One Cacao in Jamaica. So Nick, welcome. Thank you for meeting with me.
Absolute pleasure.
How did you get into making chocolate? What sparked that interest, and sort of what led up to what you do now?
Wow. It's an interesting journey. Well, I think it is. Other people might not. I worked as a journalist for the BBC, and I was very fortunate enough to be posted out to Jamaica to be the correspondent for the region for the Caribbean. And so, funny enough, I ended up, you spend a lot of your time looking for stories, trying to find interesting things of note. And I went over to the UK, and I think it was at a supermarket, a very popular chain in the UK called Waitrose, that I saw, I believe it was the Grenada Chocolate Company on the shelves.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, wow, chocolate, which comes from beans in the Caribbean. I thought they come from Africa. I mean, like, I didn't make this connection in my mind that cacao grew even within this region, because of, I guess, the history of cacao importation, especially to Europe. And so I went back, found a contact number, and Mott Green was literally on the phone. His number was on the back of, like, I'm not sure if it's on the packaging, but if you went onto the website, it went straight to him.
Okay.
And so I was in Jamaica, and I was like, listen, I'm based in the region. Love to find out more about what you guys do. And he was really challenging, but exciting and invigorating at the same time, because he was talking about, how he'd been working with the community, with people like Edmund, to actually create, added value within their communities. Not just being at the sort of end or at the beginning of a value chain, but being at the end. And I thought that was really interesting. And by the end of it, I was like, I wish that we could do something like this here in Jamaica. And he was like, well, actually, you can. A lot of our equipment came from Jamaica in the first place. So why don't you? And that kind of put a challenge in place. Fast forward, I developed a food allergy, a serious food allergy, which would put me into anaphylaxis. So I had to be very conscious, very clean in terms of what I was eating. One of the things which I was concerned about was chocolate. So literally got some local beans here, started making my own chocolate. Simple as that.
Your website says it was the sulfites that you had issue with. Is that it?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's right. A Valentine's Day to never forget. As my lovely partner, my wife, and I having dinner, and I suddenly was like,
wow.
It's horrible. And actually one of the indications that you're going through it, one of the symptoms which they say is an impending fear of doom.
Okay.
you kind of know something is really not right.
Wow.
An impending sense of doom. That's the term I'm looking for.
Well, I read they say it's very rare for people to be allergic to sulfites. Is that true? Would you say it's very rare?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's 3 million people who have this level of.
Because there's a sulfites in a lot of
food, but it's growing. More and more people are developing it, and that's something which we're seeing throughout the world. There's a lot of more people who are getting adult onset allergies.
But that's not something you find in chocolate, unless it's like chocolate covered raisins or dried fruits and things like that.
Absolutely. But listen, I grew up with the Cadbury's fruit and nuts. That was my dad's favorite. So, and actually I find that when I'm making chocolates, I know we talk about this a little bit later on, but I kind of gravitate to some of the things which I remember as a child, but kind of put a craft take on. Because it takes me to a really happy place. That's what I love about chocolate. Very few people have negative memories or negative experiences with chocolate growing up. It's normally as a reward. It's normally as treats, holidays and treats and all of that. So it's a very special food.
Okay. And so my next question is, I'm sure a lot of today's bean to bar makers love the idea of traveling to where cacao is grown. So a lot of them might be jealous that you actually live where the cacao is growing. So do you think that living in Jamaica where cacao is grown, does that give you a unique perspective to chocolate making specifically? Does that change how you look at chocolate making?
I completely.
Mm.
Um, I was really blessed. My parents have always been very supportive of what I was doing, and when I first started out, my dad helped me with my rent so that I could attend the Northwest Chocolate Festival back in
Oh, wow.
2016.
Nice.
And it was a really important year because I feel it was the last year where you got a lot of the foundation makers, the
Mm,
people who, you know, the Art Pollards, your Fruitions, your
mm.
um, Dick Taylors, all of these sort of mega
Right. They were
North
kind of leading
American
the way
producers.
back then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Already
But still
established.
being able to sort of mix with like the hoi polloi. You know what I mean? Like the randoms like myself, and hearing them talking about, what's it like when you import a container? And I was barely past like being able to buy a bag of beans. I say that to say that it was so important hearing their perspective and understanding that even though we often talk about the farmers being important and we talk about wanting to raise the quality of life for cocoa farmers around the world, I don't think it's until you actually spend time with them that you understand how critically important it is.
Mm,
Um, I mean, honestly, I spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time with farmers now, and it is a really, it's a really close to the bone business.
mm.
People are barely able to eke out a living on it.
Right.
And even when I'm
And that's true
buying,
for farming in general in a lot
yeah,
of places in the
absolutely,
world. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. The stuff which keeps us alive is the stuff which we are constantly pushing down to its thinnest margins.
Right.
But for me, being here, it connects with history, my own history. Looking into it further down the line, I realized that my forebears, especially on my mum's side, were heavily involved in cocoa,
Mm,
and the growing of cocoa for many people post emancipation was literally the only game in town.
mm.
Here in Jamaica, it was introduced as a way, as a crop for people
So
who
that
had
was
been
one of my
enslaved.
questions. That was
Yeah,
one of my questions is it tied to Jamaican culture very strongly? It sounds like it is
it
still.
is. It is, but it isn't.
Mm,
You've got to remember that historically, Jamaica was always seen as if it was going to be a cocoa producing nation. So this island originally had been almost like a fiefdom for generations of the Columbus family as a
mm,
reward for discovering the
mm.
Americas. Eventually, the British, the English at that point, come over looking for territory within the Caribbean.
Right.
They try to take what is now modern day Dominican Republic, Haiti. They fail in a bid to be able to come home with something. They take
Mm,
Jamaica, but they
mm.
actually win the prize because when they do that, they find cacao is being grown in groves, and that there are cacao pieces throughout the southern part of the island. At that point, none of the English territories had any cacao. So they were able to go back and say, look, we've got a toe in the water for this amazing product, which the Spanish and French at that point had really had, particularly the Spanish had really sort of controlled up until that point.
Right.
So
Right.
it goes back into our earliest history here in Jamaica. It was consumed by the Taino, the indigenous people on the island. So, a Jamaican Christmas isn't Christmas without having like hot cocoa,
Mm.
the beverage spiced with nutmeg and a little bit of cinnamon, ginger, bay. It isn't Jamaican cocoa until it burns like the roof lining of your mouth.
Mm.
But it's kind of part of our traditions, and I think it's important to bring it back. But when the prices are so low, it's barely worth the farmers even growing it. You know.
So would you say that um, one of the questions I have for you also is how the craft industry views cacao in Jamaica, how the world sees cacao in Jamaica, because obviously there's some countries that when people think really good cacao, those are the countries that come up. Jamaica, you don't usually hear that very often. So
Yeah.
Obviously you're going to be biased, but anyway, it's worth to ask. Does Jamaica have really good cacao? Is it as unique as some other places, or is it more just sort of that traditional flavored cacao that they grow? What would you say?
I'm going to be controversial, okay, and I will say that there's lots of great cacaos all over the world. What there isn't necessarily is the fine sort of work done to improve the quality of the cacao which comes out. And, and also, let's put the blame also with chocolate makers as well, right? I honestly don't think sometimes chocolate makers understand the process of roasting as well as they need to. So often that can be a failing as well. Here in Jamaica, I would like to say that we're special because not only do we have that original cacao, which would have made its way out of Venezuela historically, literally taken by those first peoples, those Tainos, through the island chain. So we would have been getting a lot of the original material, which would have been in Puerto Rico, which would have been in Trinidad, which would have been in Dominican Republic. We would have got that cacao through literally the movement of those indigenous peoples. But we would have also got it through the Spanish. And we've also got it through the English. And so what happened, especially here in Jamaica, people know about Trinitario and Trinidad and, this amazing sort of hybridization which happened in the islands, but it happened throughout the chain, but with different people going in different places. And what was special about Jamaica, it was the largest of the English-speaking nations within the Caribbean. In fact, it's the third largest English-speaking nation in the entire Americas. So because of that, you had a lot of movement going between Jamaica and Belize, going between Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, between Jamaica and Grenada, between Jamaica and St. Lucia, and all of that amazing material coming back to the island. And so in many respects, you have this wonderful test center for great fine flavor cacao, combined with the fact that because Jamaica's cocoa industry has sort of shrunk over the years, this goes back to what you were originally asking, why people don't know about Jamaica as much as, let's say, some of the other countries, is because it wasn't dependent on it. Sugar was king here in Jamaica. And so as the industry declined, so too did the knowledge of how good the cocoa was.
Which makes sense, right? I mean,
if
that's what's driving the people to wake up in the morning, make money,
absolutely,
they're going to go towards that.
It shrinks.
So would you say that it's still at this shrunken stage? Would you say it's starting to get back up a bit? Are more people excited about growing cacao in Jamaica?
People aren't excited by growing cacao. People like myself are excited about the potential of being able to encourage people to grow cacao. But the only way you can do that is to succeed in the promises which we make. And I think what I mean by that is cocoa goes through cycles. There was a cycle about 18 years ago when the first craft chocolates people started to come through, and people were like, if you grow craft cacao, if you grow really good fine flavor, you're going to be rich. Because just look at what happened to craft beer, and look at what happened to craft gins or whatever, or wine or coffee. Chocolate hasn't done that. And so because it hasn't done that, the promises haven't been kept. And so because of that, what you find is farmers who were already on the edge are now even more inclined to just say, forget this. These people are old. And I mean that respectfully, but the average age of cocoa farmers in Jamaica is, I think, about 67, right? You're not.
And their kids probably have other ideas about what they want to do with their lives, right?
Yeah, they have other short crops which are going to give them more money. The price of cocoa here sold by the box, it's very, very low. And actually, if you think about it from a pure dollar and cents amount, you may not have to do all of the work, which we often talk about in terms of West African farmers, because they're doing all of the fermentation, but the price per kilo is lower than what people are getting in West Africa because of the lack of work. You may not be doing the fermentation, but you're not getting paid.
Right.
And so those promises not kept mean that what we're seeing is people like myself who are in craft chocolate in Jamaica having to take on more of the role of trying to facilitate farmers, working with farmers, trying to build their capacity, and working in concert with them to try and get better results from the beans.
So that's the question. Do you feel like the cacao growers and those who ferment in Jamaica now, do you think they got it on point, or do you think there's still some fine tuning to do in regards to consistent fermented cacao that comes out in the way that people hope for?
The cacao, which is done by people who know what they're doing, is amazing. One of the world's most expensive cacaos per kilo is from Jamaica, back to the soil. You know it. Rogue Chocolatier, I think it was Rogue Chocolatier used it, Rogue Chocolate back in the day. It's been used by Dick Taylor. It's been used by Pump Street in the UK.
Right.
Great, wonderful. But that's one farmer. And this is what I always say. We have like nearly 6,000 farmers in Jamaica, probably now 3,000 who are really active.
And that sounds like a lot, because if you're coming from like a country like Canada that geographically is huge, Jamaica seems really tiny. So to hear you have 6,000 farmers, that's a lot. You're not expecting that.
That's a lot. But someone once said to me, we don't have a nation of cocoa farmers. We have a nation of farmers who happen to have cocoa.
Right.
And that's the difference.
And that's true for a lot of places, even like the Philippines, for instance. There's a lot of people who had this growing in their backyard in the States, whatever, and they don't know what to do with it, right? Or they lost that culture at some point, like in Jamaica.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fermentation doesn't happen. So fermentation for most people is a fermentation used to make the hot beverage, which honestly is basically you pick the beans, you throw them into a bucket, you leave the bucket for about 7 days. You take the beans out, you put them on a piece of zinc, like zinc roofing, and you leave it to dry there. That's it. And that's perfect for a hot cocoa, right? Especially if you're overloading it with those spices, like I was saying earlier on. Okay. But that's different to what we're looking for in craft chocolate. Now, we have great genetic material, but the fermentation, and fermentation is a science. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's not rocket science. Once you've figured out what you need for your beans, you don't need to necessarily know the science behind it. No. You just need to do it.
And that's a big point. In the chocolate world, I find that people get a bit snobby. I have a biology background, so I think in a very objective, scientific way sometimes, but food, culinary, I have a lot of experience as a chocolatier and stuff. A lot of people think, oh, it's science. It's like, well, you can use science to understand it. And for some people, understanding it helps their skill.
Yeah.
But people have been fermenting cacao for thousands of years and have learned traditional ways of doing it. They don't know anything about the science, but they know how to do it really well, right? They have the touch, they know what to smell for, to look for. So exactly, it doesn't have to be you have to have some scientists come in and train these people to do it. Not necessarily, right?
And even when you do, they don't understand how it's done here, and they don't necessarily, like, for instance, I was like mad keen, I'd got this whole protocol worked out with an expert who's amazing, right? And like the protocols had, leave for 24 hours in the anaerobic phase, move into the aerobic phase, and then, do various sort of permutations of turns and days and whatever. And I was like, yeah, we're going to go through this. And I'm talking with this old boy who's worked in cocoa since the 1970s, right? I mean, literally, he's worked in cocoa longer than this grey beard is alive. Right. And I'm saying we need to turn after 24 hours. And he's like, no. And I'm like, no, but you need to do this. And no. And what I loved was there's a great cocoa scientist called Sarah Baraf out of Trinidad. And she was saying, you need to listen. The most important thing when you're working with people who have had generations of experience passed down to them, and also years of experience themselves, is you need to listen and not come in with this this is the way it's taught in the books, and how different other chocolate makers are working with different farmers, and I have to replicate what's being done in Nicaragua, or I have to replicate what's being done in Belize, or I have to work with these farmer partners who I have to be able to improve what we do,
Right.
to improve my chocolate. Because I'm not. It's not all altruism, right? I want to build an industry here,
Yeah.
but I also want to make great chocolate. And I
Right.
know from experience now that being able to work alongside the farmers is my guarantee of supply chain. I know that I'll be able to get beans. Number one, I know that if I work alongside them, I'll be able to get good beans. If I have good beans and I'm able to make great chocolate, that's what's going to ultimately grow my business.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, nobody wants you to come into their domain and say, you've been doing it wrong. This is how you do
No.
it. That's, that's not a great way. But there's a bit of give and take, right? If you're buying beans from a particular farmer or a certain co-op, you want it to be consistent, right? And
Yeah.
So there has to be a little bit of leeway each way. But like you said, you have to come in with a listening ear. And especially because, especially for someone like me, I know sometimes what things say in the research journals and the books, they make sense and they make logic and they have evidence to support it, but it doesn't always work live, right?
No,
you have to have that flexibility.
I mean, like trying to explain to one of the farmers I worked with this week that, like when I say we're picking that morning to take to the fermentary that evening, is like, why would I do that? I'm like, well, you do that because we want it to be fresh. But this isn't the way that we do it, right? Because we've got hundreds and hundreds of pods to break open, and doing it all, I can't get the manpower, I can't get the woman power to be able to do this. How do you expect me to do? And it's like, well, I'm going to pay you more. And it's like, oh, that's great, but it's still almost impossible to break open, 3,000 pods on my own in the morning. It's great. I can talk about how important it is to be able to get that fresh pulp, to be able to get the Brix levels right, so that we know that the sugars are going to work. It means nothing.
Yeah.
It means nothing.
Yeah.
To the
They're like yeah, exactly. Practicality. I mean, if you were in West Africa and Ivory Coast, maybe you could find 20 kids to do it for free, but that's not what you're trying to build there, right?
Absolutely.
So it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. And that's a good point.
It's tricky. I would say that we are really blessed here, having this amazing genetic material.
Well, I want to talk about the chocolate that I tried of yours, because
sure.
To be honest, like the Bachelor's Hall and whatnot, I've had some Jamaica origins and they were good, For me, just because it's really expensive doesn't necessarily mean the satisfaction is out of this world. But I would say that your chocolates were not as elegant in style as, say, Dick Taylor or whatnot, because they have a lot of expensive equipment and whatnot. But the flavors of your St. Thomas, and I always forget the other name, not Caledon.
Portland?
Sorry?
Portland. Clarendon?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
The flavor was just wonderful. It was unique. There was like zero bitterness, and it was just beautiful. It was the best Jamaican chocolate I've ever had, and it was like really nice. And I thought, wow, So it's funny because you talk about this, a lot of different genetic variability from all these different areas. So it seems like there's a lot of potential there. But if you're only having, let's say Bachelor's Hall again, which is I'm not saying it's not good, but it might not resonate with everyone. And people think, oh, that's Jamaican chocolate. It has those flavor notes. It's like, wow, there's much more variability there. So you can I could definitely taste that there is a lot of potential there, So
yeah, and that's what excites me. That is, and I really like I've kind of had to reverse my thinking slightly. So instead of trying to get 100 sort of farmers to be able to join me, I'm starting with 10. I'm starting with 10 farmers who I'm working with regularly throughout the year. I'm not as sort of suddenly arrive in and disappear out. I'm paying the premium to be able to build the relationship, to build the trust, so that we can grow something together. And I do require a coalition of the willing. I do require not only people like yourself to buy and purchase and kind of spread the word, but also other people within craft chocolate, because it's unsustainable. It's very difficult doing craft chocolate in a country like Jamaica. You made reference to it earlier on. It's expensive to be able to get beans. It's expensive to be able to get bars off the island. Logistics. We may be a major transshipment hub for some things, if you know what I mean, but not necessarily cocoa coming off the island. And so we need to be able to, literally, there's a lot of work which is needed to be able to make that happen. And currently, I think currently anywhere in the world, it's difficult being a craft chocolate maker. I don't think it's a cakewalk. I think it's a hard business, and you need to have other things going. Me personally, Joseph, I'm not a chocolatier, right? And I will happily say that. In fact, I'm thinking of doing that as the name of like a YouTube channel. Like, I am not a bleeping chocolatier, right?
Okay.
And that's not me. I'm not interested in that whatsoever.
And what does that mean? What is that telling people when you say that?
Well, it's telling. I believe that it's telling people that there's a whole other side to chocolate and to craft chocolate which we haven't explored. Again, you made reference to it earlier on. It's about being in the origin. It's working with the farmers. It's about building them. It's about building the story of chocolate, which I think that people in the developed markets don't have that same connection to.
Right.
And they it's completely separate. For me, it's an integral part of what I do. When I go and get beans, I have to go and pick them up. It was hilarious the other day. I went into one of the farms, and it's down a little narrow track. And one of the farmers' manager, everybody in Jamaica has a nickname. It's just our thing, right? So manager says to me, just drive down there, okay, and we'll wheel the beans out to you. And I'm like, yeah, no problem, man, that's fine. So I drive down, and there's like literally sheer drops, okay, on one side, sheer drops on the other side. Okay. And I'm like, well, there's going to be turning space, right? Because surely manager wouldn't get me to drive all the way down here without there being a turning space. And of course, there is no turning space. So I've got to reverse back. And trust me, I'm the person who literally reverses by beeps and lines. Do you know what I mean? So I'm like thinking, that's my reality. That is a world removed away from making bonbons and pralines and that.
Right.
That's what I prefer doing, even though it's like fraught with danger. That's me. That is me, rather than the others.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's what, chocolate over the past 100 years or so has sort of had these very narrow defined roles. You have the big manufacturers, Calabo, Cocoa Berry, pumping out the chocolate, going to a little shop, making your bonbons. And it's nice now to see people in different capacities in the bean to bar world, still at sometimes somewhere at that end, some are in between, some are at your end, like doing, like you said, the dirty work, picking it up and all those logistic headaches and all that sort of stuff. And it's nice now because you guys have a platform, you can talk about it, speak about it, show people. And now people are starting to see the whole chain of how chocolate's really made and what's involved.
Yeah. And hopefully we can connect that in a way which is different. There's this is my USP, and that's what I'm, hoping to build out with what I'm doing. The story is everything to me, right? I believe that's what gives a real connection. And
well, the story is, in a way, like marketing is stories. A lot of marketing today is not always honest, but if it's an honest story, it's a really nice way to market as well, right?
Absolutely. And I've been aware that I've kind of almost gone off Instagram at the moment because of the fact that I need to develop more of me and what I do, and often that isn't particularly very Instagrammable at the moment. Building relationships with farmers isn't, if I'm taking their picture, it's exploitative, right? Which it is, right? I
think it depends why you're doing it. There's some makers that say they don't want to go to the plantations and take the pictures with them because it feels like it's exploitive, and it is. But at the same time, if you don't do any of that on purpose because you're afraid of that, then nobody knows what you're doing. They don't see that you're actually connected. Absolutely. So
but Joseph, what I want to do though is, in the same way that you have companies like Calabo doing Au Noir, which is like a high-end, almost private label or private, bespoke curvature. I would love to be able to do that for restaurants to be able to do, and we are doing that with at least one Michelin star restaurant abroad, where we do a chocolate specifically for them, connected with a particular farm.
Oh, nice.
I think that's a more interesting space for people in origin countries to try and get into, instead of trying to batter down the door.
That's a good point.
To get into other places, because I just don't. We can't compete. I can't compete with Dandelion.
But I mean, you're connect like that Michelin star restaurant, who has this small craft maker, and you have this single estate it's coming from, whatever it is. That's much more interesting, I would think, as a consumer than, we get this special thing made from cacao berry, right? It still sounds a bit mystique, and like we don't know what's going on there, but we get it from this guy, Nick, in Jamaica, and he's, it's coming from this farm, and it just sounds much more solid. And
and the thing is, coffee, we often talk about trying to link to coffee. Coffee's been doing that forever. If you go to, if you follow any of the, go to Seattle, or you go to any of like the big coffee competitions, people aren't using like big, well-known sort of origins. That it's the relationship. It's all about, this little finca which they're working with somewhere in, the hills of I don't know, Costa Rica.
Right.
That's what they have, a relationship. They work and build together to improve.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's not really happened with cocoa. No. I still feel, and again, this is a little bit tricky, I still feel that the relationship with even craft chocolate is still a little bit on the exploity side. I don't know if that's even a word, but do you know what I mean?
I know what you're saying.
It's very secondary. When it all started out, I remember this really classic YouTube video I watched of a great maker, great equipment, like we were saying earlier on, Joseph, huge longitudinal conch, and it's like, this is so amazing and wonderful. And I remember someone came on from, I believe it was Guatemala, and they were saying, we have amazing cacao, you should try it. And I just remember the person who was the maker was kind of like, because it doesn't matter anymore. Like there's so many farmers, people don't care. There's so much good quality cocoa out there, people don't really care.
There's definitely more good quality cocoa than there are people who can use it.
Exactly. And so therefore, the farmer has sort of gone back down.
Yeah, that's true.
Which means that ultimately, again, it's about, broken promises.
Which in some way means we also need more chocolate makers in a way. Some people say that it's already very niche. We don't need more competition. But at the same time, there is a lot of great cacao farmers. And if they're going to keep growing it for us, they need buyers, right?
We need to find our USP. I feel that if you look at craft chocolate, it's been saying the same thing since the day it was invented. We haven't come with something new. We haven't come with a new innovation. We've not really come with new products. We've come with new origins, and that's it. And that's not enough to be able to.
But what, compared to coffee, what has coffee innovated? Like, isn't that still the same?
Constantly. I mean, we're on a fifth wave of coffee. It's gone from being, consumer rubbish, Mr. Coffee. It went to Starbucks. It went to sort of new wavy, sort of bespoke chocolate, coffee roasters. It went to the barista thing, and now we're on a whole other level, which is probably, I don't know it as much, but it's that combination of science with the craft, which is where they're at.
I see what you're saying. But at the same time, from my perspective, where I deal with the average Joe, the public, that's what I try and reach. And for them, this whole craft chocolate thing blows their mind. It's so new. So in some ways, I understand like there are these other levels, but it seems like most people haven't even touched the first level, most general public.
That's true.
It's an interesting point, something to think about for me.
But think about it at the same point, and I'm taking your point here. Think about how long coffee was in the public consciousness. People have been having a cup of Joe for literally centuries.
They need
But
it every day.
every day, right? But it wasn't until the sort of 1980s, going into the 1990s, that we saw this fast acceleration in the way that coffee became more and more elevated. So maybe it's just not our time. The problem is that I honestly don't think that we have that much time for cocoa.
I don't think people are giving it enough thought in a way.
Yeah.
Like the craft chocolate world, oh, let's make this wonderful. We think about it from a craftsman point of view, but I don't think, and I've done this a lot, I don't think from the consumer's point of view. I'm not a marketer, so I don't, that's not my mind. But I think there's so much that probably can be done, but it seems like everyone's sort of doing the same thing in the craft chocolate world right now. And something's not working. It's not good enough. And we need to, like you said, whether it's another wave or reinvent the wheel in some way, something needs to happen in order
something
to
needs to happen. And I think that we need to figure it out, because at the moment, honestly, I look online and there's another craft chocolate maker falling by the wayside, it seems, almost every week. And it's not, it's not people who are small. These are, I guess by other businesses sizes, they're micro businesses. But for craft chocolate, these companies who have invested, many hundreds of thousands of dollars in their business, and they can't make it work.
And they're not failing because they're not creating a good product. Some of them are creating beautiful products.
Absolutely. But it's not cutting through. And that's really difficult. I presented all of the problems and the challenges we have here in the Caribbean, but at the same time, we also have lots of visitors. And so that for us is a real bonus. We're able to monetize more in some respects. We may not have the footfall of a big city, but we do have people who are interested in what we do. And you can make additional revenue doing, tours and whatnot. That isn't always possible if you're, in the boonies somewhere making craft chocolate.
Right. So people in Jamaica, there's a lot of countries where, cacao is exported, and maybe over the years they started eating chocolate, but a lot of it was that industrial chocolate, American candy bars, things like that. When you were starting off in Jamaica making chocolate, what were most of the locals eating? Were they eating Twix and imported candy bars? And how did they respond to this chocolate you were making? Did they like it? Were they like, I don't know?
Yeah, there was a lot of it bitter. Oh, and you literally see people screaming at their faces. I had friends spit chocolate out, right? Because they were like, the 70% chocolate is too dark.
But Jamaicans like sweets, right? Is that?
Oh man,
yeah.
There's a reason why there's a lot of diabetes in this country, right? We have a very sweet tooth. So because of that, it was difficult. But Jamaicans are also, seems kind of counter, they love the idea of being healthy. Okay, so it's the home of Usain Bolt and all of that sort of stuff, right? So you see the people walking early in the morning, you see the kids training at the track early in the morning. So when you say, actually, we've got this really good high antioxidant dark chocolate, for some people their eyes light up. So you've got this sort of contradiction in terms of your market. Right. You've got a very affluent 1%. The wealthy are super wealthy here. They want nothing more than to support Jamaica and build brand Jamaica and to try some wonderful Jamaican chocolates. So we actually have 8 craft chocolate makers in Jamaica. Some of them are doing straight dark chocolate. Some of them are, because of a weird quirk of history and legislation, magic mushrooms are legal in Jamaica. And so some people are now doing chocolate with magic mushrooms.
A lot of people are doing that now, yeah.
Because it's a thing, right? And it's easy money. And so, we're seeing a large number of chocolate makers, but weirdly enough, we're now starting to get into a bit of a squeeze with the amount of cocoa which is available. And so that's also a real prompt and a real push. Almost everybody who's involved in craft chocolate in Jamaica is also involved in the farm at some level also.
Mm.
We may not be farmers, some are farmers, but tree to bar is a necessary reality.
And that's so amazing, because when did these 8 craft makers, it's only been the last 5 years or whatever it is, 10 years, so it's interesting to see now this craft chocolate has allowed different regions in the world to develop their own unique chocolate culture, the way they make chocolate, the way things are going to be developed, right? This is very different than anything we can do in Canada, because you guys are like one-on-one with where the cacao is growing. You can visit there on a daily basis if you want to. So it's going to develop something very different than other countries that don't have that ability.
Definitely.
Especially because it's pretty small. You're more tight-knit as opposed to Peru or something where everything's so far away.
I remember talking to a maker, a friend in Mexico City, and I was saying to her, so sometimes it takes us like half an hour to be able to get to the fermentory, or 15 minutes to get to the farmers, and if we're bringing people onto farm, it can be really difficult. And she was like, it takes 12 hours from Mexico City to be able to get south, to be able to get to the farmers we work with. And I'm like, okay. Or if you talk about makers in I don't know, Sao Paulo, and their makers in the Amazon, it's like days, boats, planes,
going by boats.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like there complaining about, like 15 minutes.
So in a way, Jamaica already is known as this tourist destination, and you have the craft, you have the chocolate making on site, you have tours that can be easily accessible. It sounds like you guys could develop something very unique there, like a go-to place for chocolate education. A lot of people I encounter, oh yeah, I went to Costa Rica and I did a tour of a farm. So that seems like that's very developed there. And it seems like Jamaica has that opportunity to really do something like that.
Grenada's got their chocolate festival on. I think it's around about now. It's great. What you have to bear in mind is, a lot of people coming from North America do only speak one language, which is English. We're English speaking. It is easier for people who only have one language to come and visit us, or to go to Grenada or go to Trinidad, to be able to understand it. And I've always said that we should, as islands, be developing our agro-tourism way more. We should have like lots of chocolate tours, which people can go on, so people can connect the same way as you do a wine tasting. It would be great when we develop this chocolate thing that people can go and see the different processes.
Exactly. There's many regions that that's people go there to visit anyway, but the winery is just incorporated. Like if you go to this region, you're going to do a wine tasting, and it would be nice if people are going to Jamaica anyway, start associating Jamaica with cacao, Jamaica with chocolate, and bring that back to America, UK, wherever you're going. And that could be really wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good opportunity as well for makers in the US to be able to connect, makers in Canada to be able to connect with the farms and the farmers who they work with. One thing is really interesting, and I always said this, is, people often talk about supporting us by buying the beans, but what about buying the chocolate? That's another way that you can show support for the origins and the farmers who you work with. Right. It's great you buy a couple of bags, but maybe also along your own SKUs, add in some chocolates from the countries which are there. And we'll do the same thing. It just adds to the experience how different beans can have a different, you were talking about earlier with Dick Taylor and what I do, the processing is very different. It doesn't necessarily take away from the flavors which are produced at the end. Something interesting can happen. There can be magic in the bottle by it being so close.
Yeah, I know it's, a lot of makers will disagree with me. They have, they've invested in these, refined rollers and all that sort of stuff, and the conch and all that, and they can do some wonderful things with that, especially if the beans are a bit more tricky to work with. But you can have a simple just stone grinder, and some people have done incredible stuff with it too, depending on the beans they use. So it can work either way.
I've always felt that we had a natural competitive advantage, if I'm being truthful, because you're right. When you're working with beans far away, you have to eke out the best. If you're working with the farmers, the best comes to you. You know, you're closest to the action. You can work alongside them, to be able to you know, even by just paying better,
Right.
you can encourage behaviors which are going to naturally produce better quality chocolate with less effort, less money, you know. And you know, look, we've got a whole heap of sun here. You know, part of my move has always been to be completely off grid. Hopefully we're going to be getting to that point later in the year. You know, a solar factory is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, that for me, that's living the dream, right?
What about, I want to ask you too about, since you're there and you've tried cacao grown in these different parts of Jamaica, do you eat the fruit? And if so, do you notice any major differences between the taste of the fruit of the cacao?
I don't really notice any differences in the flavor of the fruit. I mean,
Okay.
the thing which I really enjoy is just getting it fresh. I mean, like, you know, when you break open a pod and it is so juicy, you know, like just looking at the actual mucilage, like the pulp, you can feel your mouth watering. In fact, even just talking about it, I can feel my mouth watering just talking about it. It's just like really white and thick, and it's almost like cotton candy, wet cotton candy around the bean. That is one of the best things ever. That is something which that is the ultimate experience, because you know, until you have it, you don't know how amazing it tastes, and then you have it and you're like, why didn't I not have more of this in my life? You know. And so yeah, for me that usage would be amazing. But yeah, I don't really notice any difference between the actual fruit, but when it comes to the beans, it's huge. And what I really enjoy is when you mess about with the fermentation from the same estate, and you then get wildly different flavors coming out of it. So I did one from one farm, our St. Mary, and did it in the traditional Jamaican fermentation style, which is a longer ferment, which brings out significantly more cocoa flavors in it. And it's like the most amazing, I don't know, slightly tart sort of brownie flavors coming through. Right? As opposed to when you take those beans on like a 5-day ferment and the fruit is so far forward, it almost tastes like a cross between quince and caramel. You know, it's crazy. Same beans, same farm, same time of year.
That's amazing, because a lot of growers around the world, you know, they're picking the cacao, they're fermenting it and drying it and sending it off, and they don't really know sometimes what's happening at the other end. But the fact that you're making chocolate, and you have this hand in experimenting with the fermentation, that just opens up another huge door of flavor potential, you know. It's
absolutely
incredible.
Absolutely. I mean, and the thing that I am looking forward to is being able to be more hands-on. The issue that I face is and maybe it's just me being a bit of a control freak. I like making on my own. You know, I like knowing I hate winnowing, but I love knowing that I've got
I
like
don't think
every
anyone likes
single
winnowing.
piece of shell. There's no shell anywhere, you know, within kilos of the chocolate. You know, when you're paying somebody else to do that, that isn't necessarily going to be the case.
Right.
You know? And so I personally have done a lot to automate within the factory space. You know, pretty much everything, even like to the extent of like getting a winch from Cocoa Town so I can take out the big stones from the big 65-pound machine, you know, because I know that I will do it. I will put in that work, and I feel good doing it. Sometimes I'm cursing, if I'm being truthful, but you know, the flip side of that is that you don't have time to be able to, let's say, be able to do everything that you could from the farm perspective. You know, that's where you have to really trust your farmer partners that they're doing.
But at least you can literally walk over, drive over, and then talk to them if things are not as you like, right? Where a
Yeah,
lot of other
yeah,
people don't have that opportunity at all. It's
true,
just not an
true.
option. Yeah. So
Cocoa farmers are they're an unusual breed. You know, they're not easy, as we say in Jamaica. So, you know, you can make all the suggestions. It sometimes falls on very much deaf ears. And again,
right.
it's because of the age. They've been doing it for a long time. You know, and I'm coming in going, guess what? You know, taste this chocolate. This is your chocolate. And they're like, oh yeah, this is great. And it's like, yeah, but I need you to do like 6
Right.
days, right? Turning on the third day, da, 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 da.
Especially at that age when they're, they want to relax a bit. They don't want to completely switch gears and have to relearn everything, right?
Absolutely,
I can understand.
absolutely. And they just don't see the importance in it. You know,
Right.
you're buying the beans. In the past, people just bought the beans. You know, nobody was like that bothered about, you know, the protocols which went along, you know, with making sure that those beans were done in a very consistent way over time. They just provided beans.
Right. Exactly.
Big change in mindset.
And they might not care too much either, in a way that like, well, I want you to do it this way because I want to really get these cherry notes and nutty notes in the chocolate. And maybe they're like, that's nice, but
It's it's foreign.
right.
It's another world. You
Yeah.
know, and especially if you say then, oh, you know, these bars which come from your cocoa, you know, they will sell in Canada for X amount of US dollars, and they're like, what? You know, it's like and again, that's another reason why we have to do better with the farmers to pay them more, right?
Mm,
Because you know the margins can be tight, but hopefully things like the solar will actually that can make a big game changer for
yeah.
me because you know Jamaica's got one of the highest electricity rates in the world, right? We're an
Okay.
island, so
Yeah.
therefore, and despite all of this sun coming down, we've been, you know, because of history, we've been slow to be able to get to a point where we've got the infrastructure to be able to capture that solar.
Mm,
So hopefully now that's something which I'm able to do, which will then be able to lead to more money being able to go down the line. That's the
interesting.
dream.
Yeah.
You just gotta keep working towards it.
Okay. What are some challenges that you face today? Where you at? And do they differ from when you started off?
The biggest challenge I face is one which I don't like saying out loud, but it's a reality, and that is we don't play well together. Chocolate makers in origin countries, we have a lot of historical baggage, which is very difficult to shake off.
Mm,
That is, we have scarce resources and the trust isn't at the same level. Earlier
mm,
on, I spoke about Northwest Chocolate Festival. What blew me away about the unconference was how much information was shared between makers from different parts of the world about technique, about shipping, about working with farmers, about fermentation, about you name it. And I came back full of enthusiasm and excitement to do the same thing locally. And the truth is, it just doesn't happen.
mm,
We don't communicate.
mm.
And it's not just here. I know the same is true in Grenada. I know the same is true in Trinidad. It becomes very closed very quickly because you're all pretty much after the same clients, the same
Right.
the
Right.
same wholesales, the same supermarkets, and that the customer education is chocolate. It's dark chocolate. What do you want? I want dark chocolate. What about that one? Yeah, it's dark chocolate. It means nothing.
Mm,
It means everything at the same time. And so, what I would love to see, and they always say that you should be the change, but it's hard. It's hard because you try and put out. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that can be a little bit demoralizing. I
yeah.
think I would love to talk to people about chocolate. I'd love to share the passion I have for chocolate with other Jamaican makers. Um, but it's not as straightforward. It's not as simple, you
Mhm.
know. And as I said, it's not just here. I'm sure if you speak to makers in Brazil, they have I know that they have great, community organizations within chocolate making, but I think that has to come it has to be developed in a way where everybody feels like they're equal, and
Mm.
that's hard because ultimately we're all businesses, and
Yeah.
we're all trying to keep our families fed.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure at some level, you guys care about each other and you're happy for each other, but at the same time, you got to look out for yourself as well, right?
Yeah,
Not everybody
absolutely.
wants, if everybody falls on the sword, then what's left over, right? So
100%, 100%. And maybe that's the thing. I think again, craft chocolate has gone through many. It's gone through ups and downs and rounds and abouts, and I think that maybe going back to 2016, it was a different time. Everybody was still trying to figure out how they were going to make this thing happen. Craft chocolate was still new enough that you had people who never tried single origin beans from Chihuahua. Now, people who are into dark chocolate, people who are into craft chocolate would have tried it. So it's difficult to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. When you're in the same country, possibly using the same beans, that ability, we can't import beans in. Well, we can. Some people do. But it creates challenges all the way through. Supply chain challenges,
right.
export challenges. And as you said, no one wants to fall on their sword because that would be stupid. But at the end of the day, it's tough. You can't, in life, we need people.
Are there people in restaurants? There's a big tourism industry, hotels in Jamaica.
Yeah.
How is it selling your chocolate to them? How does that work? Does it work? Are they interested?
Yeah. Yeah, we've been very lucky. We have a number of boutique hotels. We've got boutique, we've got all inclusive.
Not even just selling the bars, but I mean, like the chefs using it in their whatever they're making.
Yeah, yeah. So the issue with that is it's about economies of scale, right? You need to be running machines 24/7, 365 to be able to supply the chocolate for the hotel industry, right? And you need to very quickly scale up to, Universals and all of these big machines to be able to, again, that requires money. That requires infrastructure. 3-phase electricity. That has been the bane of my life. If I knew how difficult it was to get 3-phase, but it's cheap electricity. But you've got to be able to be at a certain size to be able to get that into your business. These are some of the things which you face. Now, there are companies which do that, but you are producing hundreds and hundreds of big blocks of chocolate. For me, you kind of very quickly start losing what makes it special.
Yeah, it's like restaurants, right? You have a small 20-table restaurant versus 100, 200 tables. You can't maintain that same attention to detail.
Yeah, and connection, as I said, for me, connection's everything. Connection is everything. It's what it's what makes you look across at that person from the other side of a club or a bar or a restaurant, or it's what makes you chat to somebody when you're in a waiting room waiting for your damaged car to come out from mechanics. Do you know what I mean? It's those little things which make life special, right? And I think that's what I'm also trying to translate into my chocolate.
Does your family ever come to visit you?
Yeah. My mum. I worked as a journalist before I became a chocolate maker. I think I mentioned that at the top. And my dad was way prouder of me doing chocolate.
Oh, really?
Working here with people who came from his background, from a rural Jamaican background, than anything I'd done on air. And my mum, every conversation is, what were you making today? I have to explain to her that I don't make every day.
Do they like it? Do they like this chocolate?
Yeah. Honestly, my dad passed away in 2019, and one of my fondest memories before he died was him sort of, in that very quiet. You have lots of quiet moments when somebody is going peacefully, and he was like, he really wanted some dark chocolate, so I went and I got him like an 8%, and he just sort of whispered to me and went, "This chocolate's really nice, but it bit up." Again. And I was like, okay, but it's that sort of, that smell of dark chocolate on his breath,
Mm.
will always stay with me.
Mm.
And that's a connection which I'm never going to lose. My mum's coming over in a few weeks, and she
Oh,
will be
nice.
up there, going across to John's farm. She's heard about John and his farm for the longest time, and I think they've seen each other on WhatsApp, and she can't wait to be able to go and meet him because he provides chocolate for her son's, or cocoa for her son's chocolate.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Very special,
That's really nice. And I'm sure it's proud of your parents are proud because they obviously, even though they're in the UK, they were in the UK, they love that. They love their Jamaican heritage, right? And to see their own son also appreciate that, even though I'm assuming you were born in the UK and raised there, yeah, to come back and to see that you're excited about that culture that you weren't born in, but you're kind of bringing it back. It must warm their hearts a lot to have seen that.
And it makes me, it's not easy. There's a lot of times when it's not easy, farm vehicles breaking down, cars breaking down, cocoa being picked a day earlier than it should be. These things are additional stresses to my life. Trying to get the support to be able to build these cooperatives is not easy, but it's worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. You sound like you're still very motivated. Still enjoying it.
I have moments, mate. I have moments where I'm, I definitely don't think I'm as passionate as I was a few years ago.
Okay.
But I appreciate how important it is. Like you said earlier on, nobody wants to fall on their sword, for the principle alone. I need to, really make this as profitable as it can be. But I also am aware that you need to drag others along with you at the same time.
I mean, good work is hard work, right? If you're doing something good, if you're doing something that's gonna blossom, there's gonna be a lot of hard work behind that.
And it's emotional work. I think that's one of the things about having your own business. You can appreciate this. It's those very long nights where you are thinking, to say you become more introspective when you become an entrepreneur is a massive understatement. You spend all your time seemingly in a Machiavellian plan to try and push your business forward. That's a good thing. That's also a bad thing, and I want to make sure that I
think a lot of chocolate makers get stuck in their heads. It seems like a lot of people in the industry, I do it, and I'm not pumping out chocolate like you guys or anything like that, but I do it, and a lot of other makers I hear, like because you're very passionate about it, you take it very seriously, but it like you said, it just happens all in your head, and it could be a good thing, and sometimes it is a bad thing,
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want it to completely take over your life.
No, because it can make you disillusioned, it can bring you down, makes you think, what am I doing this for?
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
You can't allow that. Those kind of thoughts, they're not going to help you in any way. What's the point?
Not at all. Not at all.
But
sometimes you also need to realize that maybe it's time to call it a day. And I think that's what we're starting to see with more makers who realize, as you said, great makers producing great chocolate. We're losing some real expertise within the industry.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, people realize that this is, it's either a hobby or it's a business.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people get sort of so caught up in the passion that they forget that you're supposed to be making a living out of this, and if you are, you're supposed to be also working with other people to bring them up at the same time. If you're not, you need to kind of just knock it on the head.
And that's a good point too, because a lot of people get into it because of the passion. They're not necessarily come from a business background. They might not be business minded, and that's a big reason of why they don't quite work out. And and then you see some people go into it with the business mind, but then from my perspective, as a chocolate sommelier, I don't really like always what they're doing, but it's sustainable. From a business perspective, it's wonderful. From a craftsman perspective, it's okay, right? It's
exactly
hard to get both in the same person.
Maybe it's about partnerships, finding people with the right skills and matching them together. Maybe that's the future of a lot of chocolate.
Some of the more successful ones I've noticed have investors. They built this relationship with an investor, and that's what's sustaining them, and it's kind of working hand in hand. I
think if you look at most of the big companies, they're all kind of got significant investor money behind them.
Yeah.
It's the only, especially for North Americans, the big North American companies, it's all, there's a lot of real estate plays. There's a lot of, all of these new big factories, it's an interesting thing that's happening at the moment in the States, especially with craft chocolate. There's going to be some big winners and probably a lot of small losers.
Yeah. Let's talk right before we finish here. I just want to talk
Sure.
a little bit about, we've been talking about chocolate and the cacao and the farms. Practically, your products on your website, what do you offer today? I noticed you offer other things other than just chocolate bars. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We were very lucky a couple of years ago to work with the ITC, the International Trade Center, and they brought a number of experts over who passed on their culinary experience. One of the things which I was really excited about was being able to make nut butter paste with our chocolate. The machines and classic melanges are perfect for that sort of thing. So cashew butters, almond butters, peanut butters with chocolate. Love that combination. As I said, love sort of going back in time, connecting with like my childhood, with like chocolate and nuts like almonds. Almost doing a sort of bespoke artisanal version of like the Cadbury's whole nut. One of the things I really enjoy doing. We have. What else do we have? We do hot chocolates, which are done in the Caribbean style with cinnamon and nutmeg. So it's like a 100% spiced chocolate bar, which you can grate down and turn into like a really fine flavor Jamaican hot cocoa, or you can have it straight. It tastes great either way. We also do for different parishes. So St. Thomas, which is to the island, Portland, which is sort of more in the sort of direction of the north coast, moving along towards the west. You've got St. Mary, a little further along, almost central Jamaica. You've got St. Catherine, which is in the south and central. You've got Clarendon, south central. And we're hoping to work with some smallholder farmers all the way over in Hanover, which is in the far west. So classic bars from around the island, all of them taste very different. So that's kind of our product lines.
And what is the best way for people, whether they're in Jamaica or outside of Jamaica, to contact you, to connect with you?
Of course. So our email is info@oneonecacao.com. The name of the business is One One Cacao. www.oneonecacao.com. The name itself comes after, sort of based on a Jamaican proverb, which is one cocoa, full basket. We have all of these wonderful little folk proverbs going around the islands. And this one means one cocoa bean at a time, one cocoa pod at a time. Little by little, you fill your basket. Little by little, you grow, you get to where you need to be. It doesn't happen all in one go. And that's kind of the way the business has been.
Okay. And you also offer experiences too, is that correct?
We do. We do a variety of experiences. We did a lot of experiences online during COVID. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird to actually have done okay during a time of global slowdown.
Right.
But we were very thankful for that.
Nice.
And we do in-person experiences alongside Sandals and with Airbnb and Peak.
Okay.
People can come with us to, do chocolate tastings like what you do, but also being able to visit the farm at the same time as well. So,
wonderful.
And we're going to have more on that very soon, because we should hopefully have a nursery and a fermentary as part of what we do on location very soon. So, exciting times ahead.
Very nice. Good. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely.
Hope we get to talk again in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. I expect to get chocolate to you at some point very soon.
We'll arrange that. Yeah. But really, really nice to meet you, Nick, and all the best with all the hard work you're doing. And thank you again. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
All right. All the best. Take care.
Thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure. Take care. Have a good Friday.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Download the free Bean to Bar app to connect with incredible chocolate makers from around the world. Also be sure to visit beantobarworld.com, your portal for all things fine chocolate, virtual tastings, free learning resources, research, and much more. Subscribe to the newsletter to stay in touch and donate to the free app and free resources here. Contact me for any chocolate-related questions you may have.